We're live already, yes. I'm happy to welcome you at the first event organized by 7 or 8 JUGs, so Java users groups from Poland. This is our first initiative, maybe not last, that depends on you. It's great that you made it to join us. And as you can see, and if I'm see it also right, you can see all the guys that are and mates that made it happen. So let me just welcome everyone here. Let me just bring you which Java users groups are behind that. So we have Bydgoszcz JUG that I'm representing. We have J Session from Białystok, represented by Łukasz. We have Lublin JUG that is not represented today, unfortunately. We have Trójmiasto JUG and Michał from Gdańsk. We have Silesia JUG and Marcin. We have Warsaw JUG and Wojtek. We have Wrocław JUG with Sebastian, and we have Zielona Góra JUG with Magda. So today's presentation will be led by Frank Delporte, and we will hear from him about Java and the Raspberry Pi programming. But that's not everything. We have some prizes for you. There are many ways to get them. So we have 4 Raspberry Pi. So after this presentation, when you'll be hungry to get programming on those embedded devices, you will have the ability to use one of that kits. We have Frank's books, so you will have more detailed information about how to start. And if you need some IDE to use, there will be some JetBrains licenses. And how to get them? So first way to get the Raspberry Pi is a little contest about our sponsor of the Raspberry Pi kits. And please be prepared.
Yep, so on the next slide, there are 2 questions about our sponsor, and the first person who posts the good answer to these questions on our chat, the first one who pops up will get the first Raspberry Pi. So let's go right now.
Okay,
and
so
that's the question.
Yeah, that's the question. 2 questions that you have to answer. The first person that puts the question on the chat wins. First question is, in which year Mobica, our sponsor, was founded? And the second, in which Polish cities Mobica has its office in? So the first person who will answer and put this answer on the chat of our channels will win the first starter kit. Okay, so go ahead, but that's not the only way to win prizes today. As your feedback is very valuable for us, we will provide you with the survey at the end of our meeting in our social media. You will have the link. And the ones that will provide the most valuable feedback, we will choose 2 of those authors and will honor them with the 2 Raspberry Pis. So that's the second way to win the prizes. But wait, there's more. We have another way, and there's another contest that you can be involved with. If you will be active on our today's meeting. So if you will have more comments or questions to Frank, then we will also honor you with the prizes. The prizes are the JetBrains products licenses that we have. We have many of them, so don't be worried and try to be active as much as you can. And the last way is a contest that will be described by Frank later. So be careful on listening for his presentation. And in that contest, the first prize is also Raspberry Pi, but supported with the Frank's book on programming on Raspberry Pi. And the second and third places will also get the Frank's book. So that's the way that you can win prizes today. It's worth to be active. It's worth to listen carefully, and it's worth to be active even after our meeting. Okay, so time flies, and I guess we have some answers. So let's check what we will. Who will win the prize?
I think we will review the answers when Frank will start his presentation,
okay.
Because we need to check who was the first and if the answer is provided it was a proper one. So I think we can go.
First you have give a proper answer and be first.
Exactly.
And in the last, yeah, great. And in the last few words, I would like to tell you about our Slack channel. There is a JVM Poland Slack channel that we would be happy to invite you to, as it's the way to grow our community, to have the channel of communication between all the people involved in JVM in Poland. So that's the way we can get closer together. So take a look at the link that we provided and join if you were pleased. And I guess that's all we have as an introduction. Let me just give a voice to Frank and his presentation.
Okay, thanks a lot. Good evening, everyone. Evening if you're from Poland or from the region. I'm happy to be here as this JUG, even if it's virtual and I'm in Belgium and you're in Poland. I will be talking about the Raspberry Pi and using Java and JavaFX on it. Let me introduce myself. I'm Frank Delporte. I live in Belgium. I do a lot of blogging on webtechie.be and PiGpio. If you don't know the second site, that's a new one with all articles and information about Java. Definitely take a look at it. And every day there's at least one new article about Java, about the environment, about the tools, and what you can do with it. I have been programming since I was 10 years old, a long time ago, and it all started with this Commodore 64, as a lot of people of my age started with. I work at Todi, a small Belgian company, a startup where we built this autonomous robot driven by AI and machine learning to do the grass mowing, which is the first product which is to be launched in March, the official first version. But I also am a volunteer at Coder Dojo. If you don't know it, it's a club for kids where they learn to program. But not really the focus on programming, but the focus is on computational thinking, working together, presenting your work. If you're facing a problem, work together, ask to your colleagues. So for kids from 7 to 18, but the coaches there are volunteers and they bring their own knowledge to these events. And that's where I got into contact with Arduino and Raspberry Pi, because coaches were using those to do electronic experiments, and they brought it to these events. And that's where I first got into contact with these amazing stuff, which is pretty inexpensive and on the other hand, very powerful. I wanted to use this Raspberry Pi to build this user interface for the drum boot of my son. So it's some toggle buttons, and you can control these relay boards, which are stacked on top of a Raspberry Pi to control different lights at 220 volt, 15 volt, 5 volt. There's also an Arduino attached to it, and the Arduino is controlling LED strips where you can address every LED separately. And all this is controlled by a Raspberry Pi with a touch interface and a web interface, because we can toggle these red signal lights from downstairs when it's time to come to the dinner table. So we don't have to yell from down the stairs that he hears us. Now, all this resulted in a first article, 4-pager for MacPi magazine, and then resulted in a book. So I have here this book. So it's really a paper book, also available, over 300 pages with examples of Java code on the Raspberry Pi. It includes getting started if you're new to Java, but I guess the audience now today is experienced Java users. For them, it's mainly how you can use your Java knowledge to do other stuff and control electronics. So for instance, this 8x8 LED matrix display, how you can put text on it, or a LED segment display like you find in clocks, or this kind of display with the weather feeds pulled from a REST API. There's even Spring examples running on a Raspberry Pi, and Swagger to control a LED or read the state of a button. And this is then the final project, which I also used in the drum boot, where you have this JavaFX user interface. It's using Mosquito, a queue in between. It's controlling an Arduino, and all that through a Raspberry Pi. That last example I will also show in this presentation. And I also have some interviews in the book about Java, the state of Java, why you would or can use Java on the Raspberry Pi. And of course, the sources are available on GitHub. Now, let's start with the start. And what is a Raspberry Pi? If you don't know it, it's a very small PC, everything on one little board. So the biggest one is 9 centimeters. And you see that you have a lot of pins and connectors, and the smallest one is 6.5 centimeters on average. So these are the main types. You have the A, the B. The B4 is the latest, let's call it, the biggest one, the most used one. And depending on the amount of memory, you have them for 40, 60, 80 euros on average, depending on the shop where you buy them. But last year, there were some new releases of these Raspberry Pis. So on the 19th of October, and I will never forget it because it was my birthday, so especially for my birthday, they launched the new Compute Module 4. And the Compute Module 4 is a bit special because you see there are no connectors on it. The connectors actually are on the bottom. And the idea of it is that you use it in your own electronics project. So you build a board around it. And there are 32 versions of this Compute Module 4, depending on the amount of memory, if there's Wi-Fi on board, these kind of configurations. And you can buy also an input-output board. So you see that it's a big board with all the possible connections which are available on this compute module. The idea is that you buy such a compute module and an I/O board together, that you start experimenting with it. And when your project is finished, you build your own electronics baseboard with only the connections you need for your specific project. So for instance, for if you're developing a machine and you want your specific connections on this board, you can build that, but put the compute module on top of it, and you have your full PC inside your own electronics project. Another launch last year was the Raspberry Pi 400. That's actually the same thing as the Raspberry Pi 4 with 4 gigabyte, but they redesigned the PCB, the board, to fit it in the existing Raspberry Pi official keyboard. And you see that you have a keyboard with all the connections at the back. So the only thing you have to add is a mouse and a screen, and a power supply, of course, and you can get started. So this is a full PC inside a keyboard. Now, where did we see this before? A keyboard with everything inside it? Yes, indeed. My very first computer was exactly the same form factor. I have to admit that the design now is a lot better. But 35 years ago, I used this Commodore 64 and these connectors on the back to control my Lego trains. So I had this control center inside my computer to start and stop my Lego trains. And I could do that with some cheap electronic components connected to the back. And that's exactly the same thing you can do with the Raspberry Pi 4. You have this 40-pin connector at the back where you can connect a lot of stuff. Now, there are some big differences, of course, in these 35 years. There's a lot more memory, but the biggest comparison is the price. If you recalculate the price of that Commodore 64 to the current cost, it would be about 1,500 euros, while you now have the Raspberry Pi 400 for under 100 euros. What is also a big difference is the screen. This is what I was programming 35 years ago. And this is what I was doing with the Raspberry Pi 4 that I used when I was writing the book. So I have this 4K display attached to it. You can even have two of these screens connected to a Raspberry Pi 4. I had two Visual Studio Codes open. I had an Arduino IDE open. All that on one PC of, I think, 45 euros. So the screen is, I think, 10 times more expensive than the computer itself. Now, why would you use Java on the Raspberry Pi? I get asked that a lot. Wasn't the Raspberry Pi designed for Python? Actually, it was. So when they were designing this board, they wanted to have a fruity name. You had the apple, which was already popular at that time. So they wanted to have something similar. So they came up with a fruit being the raspberry, and they were using Python and the number pi. So it became the Raspberry Pi. But to my opinion, it could also have been the Raspberry J or Java or whatever, because Java works just as well on this little board. Why would you use Java if you're already a Java user? Simply, you can do it. You have your knowledge. You know your language. You can do the same thing on the Raspberry Pi. And on the other hand, if you combine it with electronics, you will learn a lot of new stuff of how you use electronics, how you control it, how you interface with it. That's all new stuff if you're just a software programmer and you come into this hardware world. I don't have to defend Java here, but there are a lot of people who are saying, yeah, Java is too old, it's outdated, it's not evolving. I don't think so, because then they compare it to Python or JavaScript. But if you look at this timeline, Python is actually older than Java, and JavaScript, Qt, they are all the same age. And since we have this 6-month release cycle from a few years ago, we have also a very fast evolving Java, which introduces a lot of new tools, new methods, which allow you to program faster and also have an impact on how performant Java is on these embedded devices. Now, a fun fact, these charts that I show you here, I needed them for my book, and I started creating them. First, I thought Excel or Photoshop, but I'm a Java programmer, so I just created them as JavaFX applications, where you have some enums with the values that you want to show on this timeline, and just take a screenshot and use them in this presentation. So if you are a Java developer and you've never used JavaFX, take a look at it. It's very handy, even if it's just to create some kind of image. Last summer, I had the chance to write an article for the Oracle Java magazine about this, and it's also the example we are going to use at the end of this presentation. And it was a very popular article. Even a lot of Oracle people and Java developers discovered a new world, that you can use Java on this small PC, that you can combine it with electronics, and that you can do pretty fun stuff with it. Now, if you have a Raspberry Pi, it's just some piece of electronics, you need to add an operating system. There are a lot of them. You have even operating systems which are only with vintage games, for instance. But we are using in these examples the official Raspberry Pi operating system OS, which was formerly named Raspbian OS. It's based on Debian, so it's a Linux system, 32-bit. And if you go for the full version, you have OpenGDK 11 pre-installed, so you can immediately start with Java. There is also a 64-bit version of this operating system. You can already find it. It's not finalized yet and not official release, but it is available. So if you go for this full Raspberry Pi OS operating system, you get a lot of pre-installed tools. Also for programming. You see, this is a screenshot of the programming section of the pre-installed programs. Visual Studio Code is not part of the pre-installed components or programs, but you can easily add it, download it from the website, because a few months ago, Microsoft decided to also release Visual Studio Code for ARM and ARM64 processors, so for the Raspberry Pi. And it's very handy because you can use exactly the same plugins as you use on PC. So Visual Studio Code with the Java extension packs gives you full Java development EDA on the Raspberry Pi. IntelliJ has no ARM version yet, so that's not something you can use on the Raspberry. So we have this new Raspberry Pi board. We have an SD card with Raspberry Pi OS. We put it in this little PC and we start it up. First thing we do is go open the terminal and do a Java -version. And as you can see, Java 11 is installed, so we have everything here to get started. If you want to do a JavaFX user interface, there are a few possibilities. So JavaFX is not included anymore in the releases of the JDK, but there are some companies who provide versions of the JDK with JavaFX, and Liberica is one of them. It's perfect for getting started and doing some example projects. Getting this version of Liberica is just downloading a deb file and running some commands. And then if you do a Java min versions, you see that you have a new version in use, and inside is also the JFX, JavaFX. Another option is taking the latest OpenJFX version provided by Gluon. Gluon is the main contributor and maintainer of JavaFX, and on their website they have, for the latest versions, the ongoing releases, ongoing versions, they have also an ARM version specifically for the Raspberry Pi. And these latest versions give you some new possibilities. So one of them is direct rendering, which means that you can remove the whole window layout, that you don't see anything anymore about Raspberry Pi, but just run your program like you have kiosk mode. If you want to run an application that users cannot open the browser or do something else, they only can use your application. That's perfectly possible with JavaFX on Raspberry Pi. If you look into this video on the right, that's SpaceFX, developed by Gerrit Grunwald. So it's a little JavaFX game, and this video is actually the game running on a Raspberry Pi at 60 frames per second. So you see it's a very smooth animation, a very smooth playback of this video game. So that's also possible on the Raspberry Pi. And I've done some other experiments, like for instance, JavaFX 3D. It's one of the very first examples of 3D with Java from many years ago, but also this you can run on a Raspberry Pi. So this is just an object drone which is created in Java, and with the keys you can rotate it. And another very fun thing with Java is FXGL by Almas. It's a library to create games with Java. I use it on my Raspberry Pi to do some performance validation. So this is 30 dots moving at random speed and random locations, and these end up at around 30 frames per second animation speed with very low CPU usage and memory usage. But you can build complete games with FXGL on the Raspberry Pi, and for instance control them with buttons or add some LEDs if you want to make a flippercast or an arcade game. That's all something you can do on this Raspberry Pi. Now, if we are talking about this electronics, that's the real power, in my opinion, of the Raspberry Pi. It's this header, this 40 pins where you can connect stuff. To know what these pins can do, I've created a little Maven library. And this Maven library contains some enums with the types of pins and which pins are actually on the Raspberry Pi. So the latest Raspberry Pis have a 40-pin header. And if you look into this, so some of these pins give you a constant 3V 3, others 5V or a ground. And the other ones, you can control them by software. So you can put them on or off, do some communication with it, and control devices. By the way, this is also a JavaFX application using this Java library to visualize what's inside it. Now, what is a pin? What is a GPIO? It's a general purpose input-output pin. A long word to just tell you it can either be a 1 or a 0. We are in computer terms. So it's a true or a false. And if you translate that to electronics, it's either a 3V 3 or 0V. If you put a LED on it, it's on or off, a push or a release. As you can see on this picture, there are also some handy boards that you can buy for very cheap, and that you slide over these pins to find out which pin is a voltage pin, which is a numbered pin, so that you can use them in your projects. It's not just 1 and a 0. If you use it at certain speeds, you can have some interfacing protocols. So you have I2C, you have SPI, you have UART. All these are kinds of protocols of how you talk with electronics, for instance, to control such an 8x8 LED matrix, or to connect to a chip, or to have serial communication with an Arduino. All these are possible with the Raspberry Pi, and certain libraries will help you to set this up and use this. So if you want to start with such a thing, buy yourself an electronic starter kit. Ask it for your Valentine, I don't care. Make sure you have one, because it's a new world opening for you. You have them from 20 euros and upwards, depending if there is a Raspberry Pi or an Arduino inside it. But just make sure you have a lot of LEDs, a lot of resistors, cables, a breadboard, and then you can get started and do all the stuff that I will show you. We will be using a few basic components in this presentation. One is a LED. A LED gives you light, you put a bit of power on it. You have some special versions. You have an RGB LED. The most simple one is with 3 pins for red, green, and blue. The other one is in a strip, and if you look for the right kind of strip, that means that every LED in this strip is addressable. So you can say, I want the 10th LED to be blue and the 11th to be green, and then you can start building very fancy projects and effects. Now, if you want to use a resistor, you have to be aware that the Raspberry Pi gives you 3.3 volts. Most resistors have a lower need. So if you give them too much voltage, they will not break immediately, but they could burn. So you need a resistor in between. Now, to calculate which value you need for that resistor, again, I have this, I explained this also in the book, a small Java library which explains you the colors on these LEDs, on these resistors, excuse me. And if you put them in the right order in this tool, it will tell you that, for instance, this resistor in this picture is a 1 mega ohm resistor. And on the other side, you have this little calculation tool that if you have a Raspberry Pi of 3V 3 and you have a LED of 2V 2 with a certain ampere, what resistor you have to put in between. For your info, in the most electronic starter kits, you have a 330 ohm or 220 ohm resistor. You can use those. That means that your LED will be less bright, but that's not an issue. You will still see it light up. Now, this Maven library that you saw in the previous slide, I used it to create even an app for it. And the fun part is, if you're not interested in all this electronics, but you want to start using Java and JavaFX to build mobile apps, this is the post where you have to be. It is a small JavaFX application which is published on GitHub, and with 5 different GitHub actions, it builds a native application for both Windows, Mac, Linux, and then it pushes also a version to the App Store of Apple and to the Google Play Store, all controlled by GitHub. So the only thing you have to do is build your application once, you run it on your PC to test it, and if you're happy with it, you push it to GitHub, and a few minutes later, you have native applications for operating systems, and it's even pushed into the Play Store for testing. One of the very big hidden gems of Java and JavaFX is that you can do really powerful mobile application development. So you can find it in the App Store. It's for free, so I don't earn a thing if you download it. Now let's start with a small experiment. I have here a button which is connected to a pin, so it gets 3V 3 and it goes back to a pin, and I have an output pin and going through a resistor and a LED. Now we're using these pins, not that important to understand, but this is how it looks like. So if you start doing these experiments with electronics, you have these breadboards and some cables, and you can plug everything in. Now, this is what it looks like if I glue that breadboard on my screen, and I use the terminal just to test it. So I tell to my Raspberry Pi that I want to use this pin 3 as an output pin, and then by sending a 1 or a 0, so putting it on a high voltage or low voltage, I can see that my LED goes on and off. This is just terminal. We're not in the Java side yet. Now, for the button, I can do the same. So I can say to my Raspberry Pi, I want to use pin 5 as an input pin. Now I can read the state of this pin. So it's not pressed, it's a 0. And if you press on the button and you read it, it's a 1. So this is very basic usage of electronics on the Raspberry Pi. If we go into Java, we can actually do exactly the same as we did in the terminal, and is execute these terminal commands. So you see, for instance, here, this is plain Java, no libraries, no dependencies, just using standard Java to execute some commands like telling this pin 3 to be an output pin and then toggle it 10 times. So if we look how this works on the Raspberry Pi, we have this simple Java file with this code. You see, we don't need any imports or whatever. And because this is Java 11, we can run this Java file without compiling it. That's another very handy feature of Java 11. If you have a small Java file or class that you want to test, that you can actually just run it. You can just start it. So you see, we just called this Java file, let it run, and it toggles our LED 10 times on and off. Very basic, I know, no rocket science. This is not part of this presentation either, but I just want to show you how you can easily, with a single Java file, learn something new on the Raspberry Pi. Okay. Now let's introduce some real Java and the library, being Pi4J. Python for Java, Raspberry Pi for Java. It's an I/O library which facilitates programming electronic components for the Raspberry Pi. So it's a library inside your Java application, which will call native libraries on the Raspberry Pi, which talk to the GPIOs and then control these GPIOs or read or whatever. Now, this Pi4J project exists already since 2012, and currently we are in version 1.3, which was just released last month. It is the last version which will support Java 8, but it was created because there were some new Raspberry Pis which were not supported yet. And it also has an upgrade script to update one of the dependencies so that everyone can get started also with this latest Raspberry Pis. There is also a 1.4 version which is now being tested, which will be built for Java 11. And this Pi4J project supports a lot of electronic components, but on the other hand, because it supports so many things, it's difficult to maintain. And that's why there were not that many releases since the start of this project. And there's one big problem with this library, and that is it relies on wiring Pi. This is the underlying framework used to talk with these GPIOs, and it got deprecated last year, 2 years ago even. And it also has some confusing pin numbers. You see in this drawing, you have the pin number, you have a BCM number, and a wiring Pi number, and a lot of people get a bit scared of using these pins because of this confusion, but that's why we have schemes like this. So there is a lot of work ongoing for a completely new Pi4J version, the version 2, which is Java 11 and higher, which uses the modular approach, also supports all Raspberry Pi boards, and the native library being used has been replaced by PiGpio. And because of the completely new architecture of this library, even replacing PiGpio, if it would ever be needed, will be very easy to do, as it's taking one part out of it and just keeping all the rest. It will not support so many devices, but the device support will be separated into other projects in other libraries. So this PiGpio is also written in C. It's also available for the Raspberry Pi already a long time, and it's used by using GNI to bind it into the project. And the confusing numbering also of the pins has been removed because it uses the standard Broadcom numbering. This is a very big scheme, but it illustrates that this new library is really separated. Every block has an interface and an implementation, and it's separated so that you can really take out the modules that you really need for your project, or just update these modules which you want to extend for specific functionality. We will also be using JavaFX in this presentation, so let me introduce you Hans Solo, Gerrit Grunwald, who has created this StylesFX library. If you ever need to create some dashboard-like JavaFX application, definitely take a look at this library. Now, this is the example project that we will create. It's the same as in the Oracle Java Magazine article. And it's using this Pi4J version 1.3. So it's just a dependency to be added to your project, and you have to initiate one time your GPIO controller, which will be talking to all these pins. Now, if you want to use a let, is just asking to this controller to provision us a digital output pin. We can give it a name, we can give it the pin number and the start state. And then turning a let on and off has really become a Java object way of doing it. We put it high or low. And what's behind it to control really this pin is all handled by either the library and the underlying framework. For a pin, an input pin, a button, we ask our controller to give us an input pin, we give it the number, and we can attach an event listener, and then we come really into the Java code. We can extend or implement the default listener and extend it with our own functionality. In this case, every time the button is pressed, we just store it into a series with the timestamp and the value. And because we are using TilesFX from Gerrit Groenwald, we can have some fancy tiles like a switch tile, which toggles the LED, and we can have a chart tile to show the button changes. And if you combine all this together, then you end up with an application like this. So you see here my setup. I also have a distance sensor in this example. So toggling the button on the screen, then you see that the LED goes on and off. And if you push the button, then you see on the lower part of the screen that the chart is has some extra points. Every second, this program also does a measurement of the distance sensor, and that's what you see in the upper screen. And all this is running on a Raspberry Pi with, I think the screen costs about 60 or 70 euros. It's a 7-inch screen and it's even touch. So you can do the same, exactly the same by controlling on the screen. Okay. Just a fun experiment, 2 of these distance sensors and a distance tile of TilesFX, and you have something like this. Small intermezzo. Okay, let's move on and go to a first example of Pi4J version 2. It's a bit the same setup with a button and a LED. By the way, the version 2 of Pi4J already has a website which moved last week to GitHub. Also, we use also GitHub Actions now to publish it with their new action flow. It's really handy. Go check it out if you didn't do that yet. Now for Pi4J, you see we added a lot of commands in this example code that you can very easily understand how it works. Also here we need a context. Where is Pi4J running? What is the provider? What is the board? It's all handled inside this new auto context. And for instance, initializing a button is a bit the new Java style where you have a builder and you give it some properties that you want. And also here we have a listener with a Lambda event style to handle every event state. Here we just count the number of times that the button is pressed. And for a LED, we have a LED also. We have this config builder that we use again. And as long as the button isn't pushed 5 times, we have a toggling between high and low. Because we use this modular approach now, if you package such an application, you don't end up with one jar file, but you end up with only the jar files that you need for your project or that you added in the dependencies. So this also means that if you have a new version of your application, that you only need to replace this single jar file and that you have your latest version if you didn't change anything in the dependencies. The Maven file will also copy a run file into your project, into this distribution directory, so that you have everything to start your application. So you just have to do a sudo run and your application will start. I have one extra example I want you to show you. It's the one I use in the drum boot. It's with a Mosquito queue. So what is a queue if you never used a queue before? So you have, let's call it a post box somewhere in between, and you have a client which says to this post box, I want to receive messages. And on the other side, you have a sender which can send messages into this queue. And if you send a message into it, if you publish a message, it will go to the client. This is a very simple approach, one-on-one. You don't really need a queue there, but the queue becomes a lot more powerful if you have different senders, different subscribers. Some subscribers want to receive everything, another only wants to receive a specific type of messages. All this becomes possible with the queue, and Mosquito is just one example of a queue. You also have Rabbit and Kafka and others, but Mosquito is also available and smooth running on the Raspberry Pi, and that's why I used that one. For this example, I have the web browser running on a PC. I have on the Raspberry Pi the Mosquito, but also the application itself. On the other side, you could also have another PC also running a JavaFX application to also show what's happening through this Mosquito. But I also have an Arduino board, which is another type of electronic components, a microcontroller, which is also connected to this Mosquito through Wi-Fi and getting all the messages from this Mosquito queue. And what we are doing in this setup is everything goes to this Mosquito to start certain LED effects, LED strip effects, which are controlled by this Arduino. So the Arduino is the client receiving all these messages and handling the LED effects or controlling the LED effects. Now, installing Mosquito on a Raspberry Pi is very easy. It's just a sudo apt install and then telling what Mosquito application you want. In this case, I also install the clients because that allows you to test everything inside the terminal. So you can have a subscriber terminal and you can have a publisher, and everything you publish in one site, in one terminal, you will see it in the other terminal. And then I extended this example with a JavaFX example where it also shows you all the messages in the list view which get published, but you can also publish something from here. It ends up in the queue and you see it both in the terminal and in the JavaFX application. And then, yeah, the real power of Java is for me JavaFX to build user interfaces and not only business-like applications, but also something like this, which is completely styled with CSS. Again, a component of Gerrit Grunwald, this color selection wheels. So all these buttons are just Java buttons, but with some CSS styling. They are completely not boring buttons anymore, but they are colored and they have some effects. In this JavaFX application or Java application, I also included Undertow, the web server, which allows you to have a web page which is accessible from everywhere in your house, and you can control certain stuff on your Raspberry Pi or even on the Arduino by just using this queue. Now, if you combine all this, then you see that you have this JavaFX application. And if you select here the run effect, then you see that on the LED strip, we have this one red light LED going through. We have a fading rainbow is just cycling through all the colors. The speed can be changed. And every effect that is selected here, you see on the screen that it's in the terminal shown as a new message pushed to this message queue, to this Mosquito queue. And at the bottom, you have the Arduino, which is receiving all these messages. And then you have the web interface, the red alert, come to the dinner table, is controlled through this web interface. Okay. I'm nearly finished. I showed what I wanted to show you. What did I hope that you learn from this presentation is that Java and JavaFX on the Raspberry Pi really work. It's just put it on it, run it, start it, and you have your Java version working on it. I have done tests with Spring, with Quarkus. It's just Java, and you have your Java virtual machine for the Raspberry Pi, so you can run it exactly the same. JavaFX is a bit special because it needs support for all the graphics drivers for all the different platforms, but there are specific implementations inside Java, OpenJFX, for the Raspberry Pi. Now, if you combine all this with electronics, you really enter into a new world where you learn new stuff. My previous company where I worked, I had a lot of electronics colleagues, and they were constantly talking about I2C and all these SPI and all these other protocols, and those were new to me. And then by doing some very fun and simple experiments on the Raspberry Pi, I understood what they needed, and I could better talk to them and know what could be the limit of data going too fast, for instance. And it is because you're using Java and you have this amazing world of libraries with minimal code, you can do a lot of big things. So a Spring application, which is only a few classes and a few lines, gives you a database REST interface with Swagger, which runs perfectly smooth on the Raspberry Pi. And there's a lot of things that we can look forward to because there is a lot of involvement going on, not only in Java and JavaFX, but also into this native compilation where you have GraalVM building very small native applications, which starts in seconds or milliseconds. We have Pi4J and this new version 2, which is coming. So there will be a lot of work this year in this version 2. We are with a few people inside this project, but we will get support from a Swiss university to push this project forward, and a few students will join this project. If you want to learn more, I invite you to my website, my blog webtechie.be. I'm pretty active on Twitter, following all this evolvement in this fascinating world. And I'm also one of the writers on the PiGpio website, and we have a category there specifically aimed at the Raspberry Pi. And I can only ask you to build, to experiment, to have fun. There should also be in this sentence, have frustration, because if you start with electronics, it's a new world. You will get frustrated because something doesn't work, or you blow something up. I destroyed a few LEDs or little LED segment displays, but you have 100 LEDs for a few euros. So it's not that bad. It's not that you ruin your PC of a few thousand euros. No, I didn't manage to destroy a Raspberry Pi yet, and I've done crazy stuff. I've put 5 voltage on a ground pin and stuff like that. They flip, they do very strange things, but you just unpower them, and next time, with some luck, there's nothing wrong with your board. So they are really powerful in any sense of the word. So they are powerful in processor, they have a lot of memory, they have a lot of graphic power, but they also have a lot of electronics power. Now, indeed, I can also give a prize. If you do a tweet about the project that you want to make, or that you have in mind, or that one day, if you have time, you want to make, do a tweet with the hashtags Java on Raspberry Pi and Polish JUGs together. And then the organizers of these JUG will select 3 winners. And the first one gets the book and a Pi, and then we have 2 more books also to give away. That's it. I have seen a lot of things passing by in the chat and in the comments, so I hope someone has a list with questions.
Yeah, actually, the activity was so big that it overflowed our comment list. But I'm hoping we will manage to bring all them up. I don't know if we have time to answer all those questions, but the activity was fabulous, in my opinion. And correct me if I'm wrong, I wish that you will help us to select the most.
Definitely, I'm very curious to see what will what the IDs are. I see a question about the book. The book is available via webtechie.be, my website. There you have the books page, and you can either buy it as an ebook via LeanPub, and it's also available in paper through the Elector website.
Yes, okay. Another question. Is Raspberry Pi Zero easy enough to run Java smoothly?
I think so. I've not done a lot of Java testing yet, but for Pi4J, for the library, it is tested on the Zero. So there is only one problem with the Zero, is that it is an ARM v6 processor. So you have these different generations of ARM processors, and the OpenJDK 11, which is pre-installed on Raspberry Pi OS, is not compatible with ARM VSS. So that will give you an error. But for every error, there is a solution, of course. There is a version available of, let me go to the website. So there is a version of Java available for ARM VSS, and it's provided by Azul. So if you download it from the Azul website and install it and zip it actually, and then link Java to this version, then you have Java 11 on an ARM VSS, so even on the small Raspberry Pis. Okay. Smoothly depends on what you actually are doing. The comparison I've done between Spring and Quarkus, for instance, I got challenged by Adam Bin because I had done a blog post about Spring on Raspberry Pi, and I mentioned somewhere just in the comments, it takes 60 seconds to start up. And then he challenged me, yeah, what about Quarkus? And I think it's about, it's a lot faster. So it also depends a bit on the on the framework you choose and what dependencies you use. Huh? So if you look into the comparison, so a Spring jar takes 35 seconds to start on a Raspberry Pi 4 and 9 seconds for Quarkus. So there is a difference also in frameworks.
Yeah, I guess there was also a question for the Graal VM. Maybe that would change anything in startup time?
Definitely, but I have to be honest, I didn't have time enough the last months to check how it's evolving, because when I wrote this article about Quarkus, I also compiled it to Graal with Graal VM to a native application for my PC, and it started in incredibly fast, 0.06 seconds, but I didn't manage to compile it for Raspberry Pi at that time. And I think there is work ongoing to have Graal VM also for 32-bit and for Raspberry Pi, but I'm not sure how far they are. And that's also a bit, it's one world. It's also what Gluon is doing with JavaFX. They also want to have smooth native compilation, because it's native applications that you need to push to the Apple and the Google store. So also there's a big evolvement ongoing. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on. But I have no answer now for Graal VM on the Raspberry Pi. If someone wants to set it up and has some info for it, definitely do it. I'm also looking for new articles for the PiGpio site about Java on Raspberry or on embedded. So if anyone has an idea or an interesting blog about this subject, please let me know.
Okay. Another question: Python versus Java, what is better?
The battle of the languages.
Yeah.
I have no preference. It's you have to pick the tool that you know, and that is the best fit for the job. I'm a Java developer. That's also why I started doing Java on Raspberry Pi. But one of the examples in the book I didn't really find the best way to control a chip to do something. So I call from my Java a Python file to do something. So is there a best language? No. There is the language which fits your needs and that you know. And in some cases, that's Java. Where I definitely choose Java is for the interface. I once created a Pong game with Python, and it was a disaster. I didn't like how you built a user interface with Python. And if I see what you can do with JavaFX, it's so smooth, it's so easy. It is Java. It is really, it are Java objects. So you use them just like you'd use a database object or whatever. And you do the styling with CSS. So if you've ever done some website development and you know CSS, then you can style JavaFX applications. So is Python better? probably for some stuff, but I just love Java more.
Great answer, thanks. Another question, which Java version is first working on RPA?
First. Well, actually, until the previous one, we were working with Java 8. Now I have Java 11 is pre-installed now, but I have compiled from sources Java also on a Raspberry Pi. How do I find it back? It's somewhere here in the articles. So I think it takes 45 to 50 minutes to have a Raspberry Pi 4 GB, pulling all the sources from GitHub from Java and compiling it, and you end up with Java, I think it was 16 or 17 running on the Raspberry Pi. I have no idea if lower than 8 will work, but if you're still on 8, you should move. Because this year normally we have Java 17, which is then a long-term supported version, I think. So yeah, even Java 11 is outdated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another question.
There's one thing I can say I didn't mention, I think. One of the examples I show was using JavaFX 15 together with Java 11 on the Raspberry Pi. So keep in mind, if you're using JavaFX and you want to use the latest things of JavaFX, you can use the latest one from Gluon, but combine it with the default Java 11. That works. So it's not that JavaFX version X needs Java version X. They live next to each other. It's not that there are some breaking changes in one of them.
That's great. Okay, thanks. How many vendors provides its implementation of Java to Raspberry Pi? As we have them a lot lately.
Yeah, there are more and more. I don't know all of them, but so you have OpenJDK, which is pre-installed, and you have definitely Azul and Liberica. They have versions. And there will be more, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure about Adopt OpenJDK, if you can find them there. But on the PiGpio side, there is a lot of info about distributions of Java. I have to check it.
And if I will extend that question to if are any vendors that provide additional value. For example, is Azul the Ferrari for the Raspberry Pi?
What they especially do, and I think it's both Azul and Liberica who do that, is you can have a minified version of the GDK. For instance, if you want to have something which is very small, and I think that they can go to a Java runtime of 10, 20 megabytes, I think, then they can do that. And if you buy a license from them, they will also support you to adapt your Java version, your runtime version, to fit into your project. So if you have a specific, even if you would have another processor, if you would building an electronic device, you can go with this device to Azul or to Bellsoft, actually it is, and say, this is my processor I want to use and I want to have Java, and they can say, yeah, we can build you something for it, or we can even support you and optimize it and do some, so they can run the complete Java test set on this processor and tell you it works or it will not work. And also for JavaFX, so Gluon is the open source maintainer of OpenJFX, but they also provide a license that you can, as a developer, ask them for support. Now, Gluon has a very open strategy. I have been experimenting a lot with JavaFX on the Raspberry Pi, and I have been bugging them with questions. I think they already have some red light when I start mailing them, but they are assistants. If you have a good idea and you want to test something and you share it again with the community, then they will assist you. This app I have shown you with the resistor calculator, I had this stupid idea of let me create a JavaFX application and build it into native applications with GitHub Actions. Actually, it's Gluon who finished this project and made the application is published in the app stores with their license and their secret keys and stuff like that. So they actually published it into the app store. So they are great contribution to this open source world.
Super. Okay, another question, long one, regarding integration with electronics directly using GPIO. Do you also have a Java API, or rather no resources here?
It's a Java API. Let me show you if come on. If I can show you an example here. So actually, this is all code. So this is, for instance, a bit longer example. Oh, a bit bigger. So this is a bit longer example. So this is using this Pi4J library. So you set up a controller. This is the GPIO controller. And then you say, I want to use an output pin. So this is, for instance, to control a LED. And it's connected on GPIO 1, and it starts with a high state. So it will be on as soon as this pin is initialized. And then you have some options here. So you can put it to low. You can toggle it if you're not aware of the current state. Then you have some pulses and stuff like that. So these are the simple things for just controlling a LED. But then you have serial communication. You have all these other types of stuff that you can do with the controls. So actually, this is all inside Java, really as a Java API. So indeed, Pi4J, if you use that into your project, then you can have this this kind of interface. The quickest example to show, if you are interested, is the version 2 of the Pi4J website. Still in development. It's a snapshot version, this version 2 that we have at this moment, but it works. I have it here on a Raspberry Pi running. And this is all explaining the very basics, how you get started, what dependency you need, and then how you toggle it. So this is all plain Java code. You don't have to worry about what's underneath it. You don't need to do any Python stuff or C stuff. That's all handled by the library, which includes a GNI to call this native code. Okay.
Super, thank you. Another question. I know you can run containers, in example Docker on Raspberry. So the question is if there are any already prepared Java containers for ARM?
No. That's a good idea. What Robert Savage did, so Robert Savage is the creator of Pi4J. He has created, so to do native compilation of our library, he has created these Docker images. Oops. And these Docker images, what has he done here? I have to look it up, but if you look into this Pi4J Docker project, here you can see how he created Dockers to do cross compilation. So these Dockers can compile ARM code. That's the main idea. So it's not my specialty, but Robert has created this. And if you are really interested in Docker, how you can create a Raspberry Pi like Docker, you will probably find it here. Okay, you can also run Docker on the Raspberry Pi, but that's vice versa.
Okay, another question. Why are you using JavaFX instead of some web frameworks based on HTML?
Because I'm old. I've seen a discussion, I think it was today, of Gerrit Grunwald, who was asking himself, or yesterday, am I getting too old that I don't like web frameworks? And I have the same. Well, it's just you are inside Java. So I have my Java application doing some database stuff or reading files or whatever. Why would I add another layer? Why would I add a browser and a web framework and then have some kind of WebSocket communication or whatever to control what's on the website while I can do everything in JavaFX? If my LED is turned on or off, it's just binding the state to my JavaFX property for the background color, for instance. So I don't have to leave my Java. Everything is inside there. And it's just very light. You just have your Java application. If you strip everything from your Raspberry Pi, that you don't have this interface, but only your Java FX interface, it starts smooth. It's reliable. Of course, you can do it with web frameworks. If you are a web developer and that's your stuff, that's how you want to build user interfaces, I'm not going to stop you. But for me, JavaFX and the background Java, the backend Java is a perfect combination.
Yeah, these are very strange days that you can create the thinner client in the FX Java than in the JavaScript framework in the web browser.
There is now a whole discussion going on because JFrog is closing their repositories and stuff like that. And on the other hand, today you had this whole security news. I don't know if you heard about it, but someone, a researcher, published NPM packages with names of someone else, which got pulled automatically into projects because there is no check on who is pushing NPM packages. I don't think that can happen in Java and in the Maven repository. So if you look into this Maven repository, this amazing endless list of libraries that you have there, then again, that's a pro for Java.
I'm not really sure if it isn't it impossible on the Maven repo.
It did not happen yet. Let's call it like that.
Okay. Okay. Is there? GraalVM.
I'm not sure. I have to investigate further. When I did this blog post about comparing Spring to Quarkus on Raspberry Pi, I also mentioned I didn't succeed in building GraalVM, and some guys from GraalVM answered at that moment, it's something we need to investigate and push. So maybe it's done in the meantime. I'm not sure. It's definitely something to take a look at.
Yeah. Okay. Another question: what Java library you suggest to use for GPIO and Pi4J?
As I am now one of the members of the Pi4J project, that's the one I was. If you want to get started, if you have never done it before, and you're willing to take a little risk, then immediately jump into this version 2. Immediately go to this v2.pi4j.com. If you go into the getting started section, I'm writing on this part, so it's not finished, but it will tell you how you get started with the Raspberry Pi, what you need to do, how you burn your operating system to the SD card, how you test your Java, then how you can even use Visual Studio Code on the Raspberry Pi if you want to program on the Raspberry Pi itself. And then you have this first project. If you already have done these 3 pages, then you have a very good base point to start with. So, yeah.
Okay. Is there? No. I guess that without the context.
No. So the GPIOs, so they are either a 0 or 3.3. You have 5 volts on a pin. or on 2 pins even, I think. If you need a reason to buy my book, it's this image. So these are the 40 pins of the Raspberry Pi. And you see that you have 2 times 5 volt on this side. Yeah, on this side, but they cannot be controlled. So how do they control then a 5 volt electronics component? In many cases, they also work with 3.3. Then it's a no-brainer. And in other cases, you have, I forget the name, of course, you have the small components who take 3 volt 3 on one side and output 5 volt on the other side. So you have the small components that you can put in between. So you can, if you have 5 volt devices that you want to use with the Raspberry Pi, you have this little board to put in between.
Okay, thanks. Another one. What about GC? Which one would be the good choice for the Raspberry Pi?
What do you mean with GC?
Garbage collector, I guess.
Garbage collector. I didn't compare them. I cannot answer this one.
Maybe Epsilon does nothing.
But there is news, and news in the sense of really news. Here, someone compiled, someone being Alexei
Shapiev, yeah.
And he tweeted this 4 hours ago. JDK 17 on the Raspberry Pi 3 with very, very small pauses. Yeah. So, which garbage collector? I don't know, but let's just all jump to Java 17.
Okay. Okay, I got old Raspberry Pi 1B board. Is it worth to start with, or should I look for the new version?
I don't have such a board, so I cannot tell you. My oldest board is a 3.1.2, so I think it's dating from 2014. And there it works if I install the Azul JDK, which is for ARM v6. But for an 1B board, let me know. Try it.
Yeah. Okay, another one. Is there some kind of emulator which doesn't require attaching it to the hardware and let play with the lights and buttons?
We have some IDs for version 2 of Pi4J for that, but you have that for Arduino, definitely. You can design your Arduino C code in some web tools, and it will act and show you everything like you are doing it in I don't think for Raspberry Pi or Java, no. But it's a great idea for version 2 of the library. Yeah.
Another one, what about testing such setups? Is it possible to write integration tests, for example?
This is a good programmer. You want to start with a test.
Yeah.
Integration test, well, it's actually a challenge we have for the Pi4J project. We have this ID, it's Robert's ID. To do this. And it's an Arduino Duo on one side and a Raspberry Pi on the other side, and is to have a communication in between both of them. And then if we put a pin high on the Raspberry Pi, that we check on the Arduino, indeed, is it detecting this pin change? So it's also something, maybe a student project, we have no idea because it will take some time, is that we have 2 devices testing each other. Of course, then you have the issue if there is an error on which side it is, but that's something to investigate later. For integration testing, no, I have no real idea at this moment. But it's definitely something we are investigating for the Pi4J project.
Okay. One question from my side on this moment. Do you know of any usage of Raspberry Pi in life critical systems or something like that? Is it?
That's a bit difficult to know, and there are some rumors that there are even washing machines with some kind of fancy interface which have a Raspberry Pi inside. But I don't know why, but you don't see a lot of advertisement of companies Raspberry Pi inside, which is a bit a pity. We have done some consultancy things for this, but there are some medical devices that we are on the search for. We know that they exist, but we don't know where. So they say they have, the Raspberry Pi Foundation says they have sold a lot of these compute modules. And I can only see professional use of those boards because you have to stick them on your own hardware. So I don't know. Oracle has been on an event last year, before the Corona, of course, with a supercluster with 1024 Raspberry Pis in one big case to show distributed Linux systems. That's something I know of. But no, if someone has devices that he knows that they exist, we are looking for them because we have this featured projects page. But yeah, we only, this is one we know that's a hobby project from someone, but we want to have more here and definitely professional things.
Okay, thanks. Another question, is there some good embedded Java persistence?
I like the H2 database. I don't know if you know, it's inside your Java. You can store it to a local file, of course. So if you restart that, you still have it there. That's what I've used in one of the examples to store states of buttons, for instance. I love it because it's so compact. It starts so fast, and again, it's real Java. But you can install, of course, MySQL or other stuff.
Yeah, I guess the H2 is a great.
Yeah.
Okay, I saw there is a possibility to install Java Micro Edition on Raspberry Pi instead of classic ARM.
As far as I know, this Micro Edition, I'm wondering, is it still alive?
Yeah.
I have. On the other hand, you have the evolution of Java itself, of the big one, which just starts and works so well on Raspberry Pi that I'm wondering, do they still have benefit of this Micro Edition? On the other hand, you have Azul and other providers who can build you a custom Java runtime for a specific device. So I think this Micro Edition is not really alive. I don't know. I've been looking into it a few months ago, and it seemed all out, old information. Oracle is still behind it, I guess, but I never seen it in the field somewhere.
Okay.
And Raspberry Pi, Raspberry Pi Pico is something else. Raspberry Pi Pico is a microcontroller, so that's in the family of Arduino. So don't think if someone managed to get Java on it, I'm sure would like to know. But no, I don't think so. No.
Another question. We've seen a performance of game with the sprites or sprite.
Yeah, swiping the screen. Let's say screen. I would create. I guess so. I think it's more related to how your Java project itself is created, but I have a small application that I'm working on the Raspberry Pi, which switches from screens using tap pane and loading different views. I have no performance issue at all.
Okay.
For such cases, it's easy to just create something very fast. Don't put a lot of work in it, but just try it out.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Another one. What is the
Memory
memory consumption? Yeah.
I'm wondering if I can show you something. Not really. Don't have anything running at this moment. I know. I have this JavaFX application for a project for a client, and I think it's about 40 megabytes, and the CPU stays under 10%, and it's on a Raspberry Pi 3. So it's very low. You can do a lot more on this board.
Okay. Next question: is there in JFX with touch screen on RPI support or for gestures?
Scroll list. No idea. That's someone has to try this out. Because indeed you have these touchscreens. I now have bought for a home project a new touchscreen. It has 5-point touch, but then
Okay, so another question
to try out.
Is Raspberry Pi working only with dedicated sensors or anyone?
No, because what I use is actually an Arduino kit. I have some Arduino kits, and like I say, so this small distance sensor. It's not laying here. So these two eyes, it's like a bat. So it works like a bat, a flying bat. So it sends a ultrasound sound signal, and it reflects and it comes back. So actually, these sensors are designed to work on 5 volt. But when using them with the Raspberry Pi on 3.3, it also works. So some of these sensors, they are really not limited to certain voltages. So it's definitely not that you need to buy a Raspberry Pi electronics kit, because they don't even exist. It's really standard components. For LEDs, you will need a resistor to go to the correct current. But yeah, it's all basic components, yeah.
Let me just ask you an additional question, because we have almost the 7 p.m. Do you have some more time? Because we have a lot of more questions.
And we still have people in the room. Okay. I have some more time.
People, to be honest. So quite a bit.
Can you repeat? I did mention you. I didn't hear you.
150 people are watching us at the moment, so still
quite
a crowd here.
I've done a lot of some conferences in the last months. I think this is the biggest audience then.
Yeah, people are hungry because we didn't have much occasions to meet lately.
Actually, it was a bad timing with my book. My book got published, the paper one, in March 2020, and I was going to do some JUGs in Belgium live, but yeah.
But worst timing or best timing, because we had a lot of time to do some side jobs on Raspberry Pi.
Yeah, indeed. And even in my previous job, because of Corona, they shut down the company completely for 7 weeks.
Wow.
So I was at home 7 weeks, and my kids had to study at home. So I had, we're busy with the kids, but I think we redecorated and reorganized the whole house. and I did some more blogging and then writing on Raspberry Pi. So definitely, it was a very strange year, but on the one side, it gave opportunities, and on the other side, it's Corona. Okay.
So we have some more time for questions, okay.
I have my home project is the biggest one. So this touch controller that I created for my son. So with these screens, it's the biggest because it combines both a queue an Arduino, a Raspberry Pi, electronics, some relay boards, but the electronics interfaces are rather limited. So it's controlling 8 relais and then some serial communication to the Arduino to do the LED strips. And then I have some projects, professional, but they are professional, so I cannot mention them all. But yeah, as you can read in these examples that I created with Quarkus and Spring, any Java project will work. So if you want to build your own home domotic system or some kind like that, there are even Java frameworks which are popular on Raspberry Pi, which are created with Java, and that's some people are not aware of it.
And how about projects where many of Raspberry Pis would be used, a network of them, for example?
If you want to do home automation, you have PyDome, and that's actually written in Java. It even got a JUGs Choice Award, so that's one big project I know of. And then you have this Oracle Raspberry Pi cluster. Will I look at say? Isn't this an amazing project? So these are all Raspberry Pis.
Great one.
I thought it was 1024, but I read here is 1060.
Does it need additional cooling or something?
Yeah, I don't know. And it's to demonstrate, how you can cluster Oracle systems on a lot of devices.
Wow.
So if anyone wants to build something like this, there are a lot of people tweeting and sharing 3D printing projects to build your own cluster. That you, for instance, can group 10 Raspberry Pis into one rack unit or 2 rack units, I think, with some hard drives and stuff like that. So there's definitely a lot of inspiration out there.
That may produce some bitcoins, even, I guess.
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not into that world. It consumes too much electricity.
Yeah. Okay. What about first-person view system, which is used in the remote controlled models? Have you ever set up this project?
No.
The problem would be latency, you think, or something else?
Maybe. I don't know. That will be for someone else to answer.
Okay. Next question. Just let us find another one.
Scrolling down, but there's more of the discussion in the comments rather than new questions.
Yeah.
We have a very active crowd today, so we're very happy about that.
Yeah, but you give them a prize if they are active.
Yeah.
Don't ruin it. Don't ruin it, please.
I hope that's not the only reason.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We believed in them. We still do believe that it's just for hunger for knowledge. Okay.
I see a question. Can Raspberry Pi read input data from, for example, temperature module like in Arduino? Yes, that's what I've done actually. So that's one of the examples. So I used an Arduino with a light sensor or something like that. Let me find it back. So here you have a setup like that. So it's an Arduino is actually, so what is not available on a Raspberry Pi is an analog pin. So it are all digital pins. So a digital pin means it's either a 1 or a 0. An analog pin can read values from 0 up till 1024. So if you connect a light sensor, and you come closer with your hand, so it gets darker, then you will see that this value increments from 1024 to something lower. So you have either chips that you can connect to a Raspberry Pi to do that it converts an analog signal into a digital, or you can use an Arduino, which has, I think most of the time, 5 of these pins. And then you can just use a serial communication to get this from an Arduino. And then I used a JavaFX chart to display these values. So indeed, you can use an Arduino to get the values via serial and do something with it in Java. So that's possible, yes.
Okay, and we have a question about HTML and mixing the content with JavaFX.
The last time I used WebView, it didn't work on Raspberry Pi because there are some special things in JavaFX which really need to be implemented for the specific hardware, being a video, audio, and the WebView. And I'm not sure about the state of the WebView in JavaFX. What would be a good idea if there are people who really need this and want to do a project with it is that they buy for long-term support to Gluon. And if there are enough people who need this, then they can even push some parts of the development forward, or can, of course, help in this is open source project, OpenJFX, just like OpenJDK. They are on GitHub and everyone can look into the code. And if he is a specialist in Raspberry Pi, for instance, or in this embedded Linux, and can assist in these platform-specific implementations, he's more than welcome to do so in these communities.
Okay, another one. Another one has to, Wojtek, you're muted.
And I am talking. Yeah, so I think that we are done with questions. Oh, no, there's another one.
Is there any ready-to-use built-in SDK that fully supports USB hit?
No idea. No. Real-time Java. Real-time Java. Yeah.
Especially with the garbage collector. Yeah.
Yeah. Then I think you have to talk to an Azure, for instance, because they have this Zulu, I think it's called, the Zulu version of GDK, which is really for real-time kind of stuff. They use it, for instance, in bank and this money transfer stuff. I don't think for Raspberry Pi, then you would need a real-time operating system, I think. But that's really low level, so I'm not going that way.
Yeah. Okay. Can I use Raspberry Pi in professional applications such as industrial process automation?
That's where you have the compute module. So that's the ID and compute. So that's where you have these modules for. So that's the ID. So this is a full Raspberry Pi 4. You can choose how many memory you have on them. On the back, you have 2 of these connectors. And the idea is that you indeed combine it with a baseboard that fits into your device that you're building. And then you design the connections around it. Or if it's just controlling, if you're familiar enough with Linux, it is a Linux device. If you can set it up to be reliable and that you don't have taken too much dependencies into your Linux, that it becomes slow or it has some memory issues, then definitely it is very powerful. So why not use it for such kind of stuff? Yeah.
Okay. How about the drivers and using SPI, SCI?
Yeah, they are there. So we have SPI. What did I do in my book with SPI? I should reread it myself again. 205.
But I guess for each question here, the answer is in the book. So the answer is easy by the book.
So actually, these 8x8 LED matrix that I used showed also in the video. It has a chip and it is controlled with SPI, so from Java. So that's part of the libraries indeed.
I cannot see any more questions. If there are some, please post it right now, because we are coming to the end of our today's meetup.
Okay.
So it's a bit time for summaries. So first thing first, at the very beginning, we had a contest to win a Raspberry Pi starter kit. And the question was about our sponsor, Mosquitto company. And please, if you are still with us, Konrad, please contact us on leaders@warszawa.jug.pl. You are, by our knowledge, the first one who answered this correctly, even though you made a small typo in Bydgoszcz name, but we know Bydgoszcz is the hardest.
And that's why I additionally hate you.
Yeah, but that's only Wojtek. We kind of like it. So please contact us here. So that was the first opportunity to win a Raspberry Pi. The second one, please go to the survey under this link, fill out the survey, and I think we'll give you kind of 48 hours to do so. Then we will close the survey, and we just pick up 2 people with the best or just the feedback you gave us to win another 2 kits of Raspberry Pi.
Yes, and the link will be provided with our social media, all JUGs.
Exactly. It will be posted as well. That's the second thing. Thank you very much, Frank. This is the third opportunity to win our prizes. The Raspberry 4 kit from Mobica and JUGs, and ebooks from Frank. So there was a question of how much time do you have? We will have, I think today is 11th, so end of the day of 21st, 10 days. So you can peacefully just think about the idea. It's not a flash contest. Take some time to think about the best idea you have. And we will provide the details on the contest on our social media. So other than that, what you can see here, we will provide more details on our Twitter, Facebook accounts. So just follow us. But the contest itself, it will be on Twitter.
No. Yeah, and sorry to interrupt you. If you don't have a Twitter account, you can always ask us to retweet your question, which will be sent by the email, for example.
You can find us on Slack, for example. If there is something like that, find us on Slack, and we'll try to figure something out. Well, maybe we'll post it in your behalf. Okay, so that's the third thing. And
I already see a GitHub contribution, so very nice.
Just for the summary, on average there was a lot, around 170 viewers live. So great crowd. We are very happy that you all were with us. But the most active ones, and as promised, will reward you the most active people with JetBrains licenses. And there will, as you could see, because now I think the Q&A session was longer than the presentation itself, and that's really great, because the presentation it's very often recorded and you can watch it online right now. But the question that you can ask to our speaker, it's only one-time opportunity. So
that's bring unique value.
Exactly. So 7 people we found that were the most active ones. So if you find your nick over there, please contact us. It's a lot of people, but as you could see, a lot of people were active today, which we are very thankful for. And that's the fourth, I think, opportunity to win prizes today. So as someone mentioned, lots of prizes, but we are very happy that we could make this happen today. And when I'm thinking about making this happen, I also wanted to thank Piotr Przybył, who I think around November 1st mentioned about doing something on Twitter and together with Frank. So he was we had it in here, but we needed a push, and Piotr pushed us pretty good. That's why we are here today. Is there anything more from my side? I don't think so. I'm just looking if there are more questions, but I don't think so. Can you provide email address?
I know we had some activity from Dublin, Jack.
Oh yeah,
there.
I promise.
Yeah.
There was yeah. So we have something from Dublin.
Igor.
Yeah.
Hello.
So greetings
From
to Dublin too. Maybe we will have to think something to extend from Poland. Maybe more Europe JUGs together.
Europe JUGs together. Yeah.
By the way, there are some articles from Igor also on the PiGpio site, who is also doing Java on Raspberry Pi. So it's
great
all
company here.
one small world.
Yeah. So greetings to Igor.
Okay. This is the email once more. Someone asked for that. We will try to provide those details once more on our social media. So if you missed it, all of our destination on the YouTube channels of our JUGs, those recordings will be available just after the end of the session. So don't worry, it won't get missing. And I think that's all. I'm looking if every of our JUG leaders are there to just wave goodbye. I cannot see one of them, but I'll just
Yeah. I have a proposition on each our live sessions when we are just on site seeing the speaker has the applause at the end, and I think you deserve the applause here. And in that limited audition, we can provide the applause for you. So big applause for Frank.
Thanks a lot. And thanks a lot for organizing and combining all these JUGs. It's really amazing.
Yeah, I think so too. Thank you for everybody, every organizer, because those are people that are behind all the events that you can watch on your local JUGs. But now we were able to do something together. So huge shout out for you guys too as well.
Yeah.
Okay, super. Thank you very much. In these difficult times, there are pros and cons, as you said, Frank. The pros is that we can make it together. I guess if there wouldn't be pandemic, we wouldn't think about it. And now that's something good. Good takeaway from that. And thank you very much for your attendance, for your presentation. Thank everyone who attended, the viewers for the activity. Thanks for the thanks leaders for the organizing. And I guess that's not the last time we meet, I guess.
We asked you in the survey if it's something you like. So if the answer will be yes, we will be back, and if the answer is no, we will be back together probably as well, because we just really enjoyed what we did here.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's all, Wojtek. Everything we can. Yep. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for Frank for being here tonight, and see you next time.
Okay. Good evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.